In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, a busy day on Capitol Hill. President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, accuses him of criminal conduct in office in a hotly contested House hearing. And in a separate hearing, U.S. Trade Chief Robert Lighthizer says the administration is pushing for a deal with China that includes significant structural changes to Beijing's economic model. Plus, President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on schedule for a one-on-one session to begin the second and final day of their summit. We are live in Hanoi. And our exclusive conversation with Alibaba Executive Vice Chair and co-founder Joe Tsai, why he's optimistic about a U.S.-China trade deal and why he thinks investing in professional sports could help ease some of the tension. First to our top story, all eyes in Washington on President Trump's longtime former personal attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen, testifying before Congress. The contentious affair continuing after more than 6 hours. We saw plenty of heated exchanges as Cohen laid out a list of damning allegations against the president, including a bombshell about the 2016 hacked Democratic National Committee emails.
A lot of people have asked me about whether Mr. Trump knew about the release of the hacked documents, the Democratic National Committee emails, ahead of time. And the answer is yes.
Plenty to discuss. I want to get to New York, where Winnie O'Kelly, our Bloomberg executive editor who covers financial investigations, is standing by. So, Winnie, let's start with that one. First of all, the revelation that Trump knew about this email hack.
That's right. So, according to Cohen, Roger Stone called the office, and Trump's assistant put him on the speakerphone. Roger Stone then said that he had talked to Julian Assange of WikiLeaks and that this dump was coming. I will have to note here that Julian Assange has said he never talked to Roger Stone. So once again, we're kind of caught up in a bit of a what could be the truth here. I will point out that it is often the truth that there is a go-between. So whether someone else who represents Assange might have spoken to Stone remains a question, and whether Stone was even telling the truth, if indeed that's what he said. Roger Stone himself is operating under a gag order by a judge right now, so we're not hearing from him this afternoon. But it is one of several tantalizing things coming out of the Cohen testimony.
So let's talk about the other tantalizing things. I mean, much of what we heard reiterated what he wrote in his opening testimony, but what are the new and most significant revelations otherwise?
Well, I have to be honest about this. I think for prosecutors, there's nothing revelatory here. But for the rest of the public, it is really astounding to see a sitting president attacked and treated like this in Congress. It is quite unusual. Certainly not since Bill Clinton's impeachment hearings have we seen anything quite like this. So the mere attacks on his personality and his character are stunning. In terms of the legal issues, obviously, Michael Cohen cannot speak for prosecutors, but what he can do is give us a glimpse of some of the threads of open inquiries. So we can see potential here, and that's all it is at the moment, but quite interesting. And there are several. One involves the Trump Organization itself. According to Cohen, Weisselberg and others there were involved in several questionable activities along with Trump. You know, Cohen says that Trump was the one who dictated the terms of the payments to Stormy Daniels and then repaying Michael Cohen for it. That is according to Cohen. And then Cohen says Weisselberg, who was the longtime chief financial officer of the Trump Organization, took him aside and said, we're going to do this over a period of time, and we're going to make it look like a retainer agreement for legal work. That would be, you know, some kind of a books and records issue for this corporation. So that's one thing. Separately, Cohen talked about how Trump may have inflated values for certain purposes of assets and then undercounted them for other purposes. So did he misrepresent the value of assets, for example, when trying to obtain bank loans, or, for example, when trying to get insurance premiums lowered? Those things have now been brought forth and give us a tantalizing tidbit of what prosecutors could be looking at. Those are a couple good examples.
Now, the president is busy in Hanoi, so unclear how much of this testimony he was able to watch. He did retweet an old tweet that he himself wrote saying Michael Cohen was one of many lawyers who represented me. Unfortunately, he had other clients, too. He was just disbarred by the state Supreme Court for lying and fraud. He did bad things unrelated to Trump. He is lying in order to reduce his prison time. And, Cohen was interrogated over and over again by Republicans, pointing out that, yes, he did indeed lie to Congress. Yes, he is going to jail for lying to Congress. But that said, what are the tangible sort of legal issues that might arise out of this testimony as it pertains to possible collusion and possible obstruction of justice?
Well, on the collusion front, there wasn't much new. Michael Cohen was asked point blank about that, and he said he was not aware of any efforts. He did suggest that Trump knew about this information that was coming from WikiLeaks. It didn't go to the point of saying that he directed it or was involved in it. The other example was the infamous Trump Tower meeting involving his son, Don Jr., and a Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya, and others. In that case, again, Cohen is speaking from what he suspects to be true, but not what he knows. And he talked about how Don Jr. didn't do anything without his father's permission, and that Don Jr. certainly would have consulted him on this. He went so far as to say he recollected a conversation between them that he now believes was about that. But that was not proof. So I think to the core issue about collusion, I don't think we got a lot new today, except for perhaps a little bit more detail, a little bit more color, and a few more questions about whether someone was involved in communicating with WikiLeaks.
All right, Winnie O'Kelly, our executive editor, I know you continue to follow this as we all have been riveted. Thank you so much for that update. Meantime, Michael Cohen wasn't the only person speaking to U.S. Congress on Wednesday. President Trump's top trade rep, Robert Lighthizer, testified before the House Ways and Means Committee on the continuing trade talks with China. He made sure to highlight the importance of technology in these efforts. Take a listen.
China, as you suggest, knows full well that it's the key. Technology is what's going to determine who rules the future.
Sarah McGregor, who leads Bloomberg's U.S. economic policy coverage, joins us now from Washington. So did Lighthizer, Sarah, sort of dampen the optimism around a deal with his testimony?
Absolutely. It's no surprise that Lighthizer is a bit of a trade hawk. He's wanted to go tougher on China from day one of these negotiations. But his tone was definitely more cautious than Trump's earlier in the week when he delayed this March 1st deadline, this tariff truce. Lighthizer said, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for a deal. And once this deal is done, if it ever does get done, there's going to be monitoring of it. There's going to be meetings that need to happen and a lot more work to ensure that China's actually implementing its promises, including these tough issues, as you mentioned, intellectual property theft, alleged forced technology transfers. There's going to be constant vigilance to make sure that what China says it's going to do, it lives up to.
Does that sort of contradict what the president said earlier this week? He talked about progress. He's delaying that tariff increase deadline. Does it suggest a sort of mismatch between what the president wants and what might be actually happening?
I think it injects some realism into what's actually going on behind the scenes. Of course, Trump said that the sides made substantial progress, but a deal of this magnitude, and as you mentioned earlier, and with such high consequences right now, this is really about, dominance of the future, technological innovation. And I think that, to try and tackle some of these issues, even if they have a few more weeks now tacked on to their deadline for these tariffs not to be raised, it isn't a lot of time to deal with these weighty issues.
So, Sarah, what is next? What's the timeline?
So we've not heard yet of the next round of talks. Of course, the last one just wrapped up here Sunday in Washington. We haven't heard yet when the next official talks will happen. Of course, Trump's in Vietnam right now for another very important meeting, which, of course, China's involved in as a big economic player in the region. Trump's meeting with the North Korean leader, of course, they're pretty focused, the administration, on that right now. We expect talks to pick up when Trump gets back. There is talk from Trump himself of a signing summit with the Chinese president. But as Lighthizer reminded us today, there's a lot more to deal with before they can be signing a deal. And Lighthizer said, this isn't going to be a soybean solution. Those were his words. It's not going to be a matter of China agreeing to buy a few more agricultural and energy products. They really want a fulsome deal that deals with IP, tech transfers, state subsidies, the whole gamut.
Right. And of course, we're going to continue to follow how whatever outcome from this summit with Kim Jong-un impacts these talks, given the role that China plays there. Bloomberg's Sarah McGregor, thank you so much for stopping by. Coming up, the FTC is putting big tech on notice. What its new task force could mean for tech deals, past, present, and future. That's next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio, listen on the Bloomberg app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. Big tech in the U.S. could be under greater scrutiny from federal regulators. The Federal Trade Commission is creating a task force to investigate potential antitrust conduct by tech companies. The group will consist of senior officials and 17 lawyers. They will also be looking at past tech mergers that could have hurt consumers. So what does it mean for big tech companies like Google and Facebook? To answer that, I want to get to Washington, where we are joined by Matt Stoller, a fellow at the Open Markets Institute, an organization that advocates for aggressive antitrust enforcement. Also with us, our Bloomberg antitrust reporter, David McLaughlin. So, David, I can think of a few big past tech mergers, Facebook buying WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram. What exactly is this task force going to do?
Well, they're going to look at potentially anti-competitive conduct by tech companies. And as you mentioned, one of the really interesting things that the FTC announced yesterday was this idea that they could go back and look at consummated deals, deals that either they investigated or didn't investigate at all, that closed, and the possibility that they could go back now and potentially break up companies or require a spinoff. And that, if that came to be, that would be a fairly radical move by the agency. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of criticism that some tech deals like Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram, even a lot of Google deals, should not have been approved at the time, and turned out to give those companies a dominant position in their market.
So let's get the view from one of the critics. Matt, you've called this task force a joke. Why?
Well, look, it's a commission that is creating a task force to encourage cooperation among its bureaus, right? I mean, great job, guys. Do something. Right? I mean, the Facebook, since 2006 or 7, Facebook's bought over 70 companies. Google's bought over 200. The FTC hasn't challenged a single one. There were deceptive statements by Mark Zuckerberg during the WhatsApp acquisition when he said that they effectively wouldn't change the privacy terms for WhatsApp users. The FTC has been, quote unquote, investigating the Cambridge Analytica scandal for almost a year. No Wall Street investors ever ask Mark Zuckerberg about the FTC investigation, but they are perfectly happy to ask questions about European regulators. So this is really a crisis of legitimacy for the FTC. And rather than actually doing anything, they come out with a new seating chart.
For the record, I did ask Sheryl Sandberg about the FTC investigation. I didn't get much of an answer, but we have reported that the FTC is preparing a record fine. Now, will this be a drop in the bucket for Facebook? We don't know yet. David, what are the chances of the FTC actually taking action here, actually unwinding one of these previous and already completed acquisitions?
Well, based on the agency's track record, not just the FTC, but DOJ, that would be pretty radical. Both agencies, which they both share antitrust jurisdiction in the United States, are right now facing a lot of criticism from people like Matt and others that enforcement just has not been aggressive enough. And one of the reasons is they're too permissive on big mergers, allowing, in many cases, tech companies to buy potential rivals, buy up companies that are potential competitors. And I've never covered a case where an agency has gone back to undo a deal that's already been consummated. So I think this announcement has drawn some, sort of cautious optimism from some quarters, but also some criticism that this is the kind of work that they should have been doing all along. And then there are some questions about why they need a task force to do something that they should have been doing in the first place.
Well, and on that note, Matt, for all the criticism, isn't this the agency doing something rather than doing nothing, as you argue they have been?
Really, no. I mean, this is a new seating chart. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. They need to actually police American markets as their mandates suggest they should. It really doesn't matter who sits where in the building.
I do want to ask you, Matt, about your organization's connections to George Soros. Of course, there's been much controversy about that. Soros has been a huge critic of Facebook, even to the extent that Sheryl Sandberg directed her staff to see if he had anything to gain financially or otherwise from these criticisms. Does he have anything to gain?
George Soros?
Yeah.
I have no I have no idea. We are a think tank. We take no money from for-profit corporations. We get foundation funding. I think that we had a grant from the Open Society Institute. I don't think it was a big grant, but we've done work on monopoly for years. I don't know what George Soros's interests are. I mean, my sense is that I've read his speeches. He's concerned about totalitarianism in China and elsewhere. I don't know if that answers your question, but,
Well, it helps to address some of the concern. Before we go, just for the record, what are some of the big tech acquisitions that you think shouldn't have happened? We mentioned a couple by Facebook. There's Google buying Waze. There's Amazon buying Whole Foods. Whole Foods isn't really tech exclusively. But what are some deals that you think should have never been approved?
Well, I think there's two ways to understand this. So first of all, Google has 8 products with more than 1 billion users. Most of those are acquisitions. So yeah, that's Google, YouTube, Keyhole, Applied Semantics, DoubleClick, AdMob. You can go down and find their whole, the way they achieve market dominance in one sector and then monopolize all the plumbing in the ad market. All that needs to be broken apart. It can be broken apart just with a rule written by the FTC. I think for Facebook, you've got WhatsApp, Instagram, and then Anavo, and probably a whole bunch of other companies. They bought one from Microsoft to match, to do data targeting. But really what this is about is ensuring that our ad markets are fair and open. And right now, what these tech monopolists are doing is they are unfairly redirecting advertising money from publishers of content to themselves and manipulating the free flow of information online. And it's the FTC's job to make sure that that doesn't happen. So they have to do it.
All right. Well, we will, of course, be tracking how this actually progresses. Matt Stoller of the Open Markets Institute and Bloomberg's David McLaughlin, thank you both. A reminder, Bloomberg Tech live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology and follow our Global Breaking News Network TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Dutch payments firm Adyen continues to defy expectations with another earnings beat that sent shares soaring in Europe back to almost triple the listing price 8 months ago. Bloomberg's Casper Vida broke down the results from London.
Europe's hottest IPO last year continues to defy expectations with another earnings beat. The Dutch firm Adyen, which processes payments for Netflix, Spotify and Uber, reported an increase in settled volumes. The boost was supported by improved capabilities in the Asia-Pacific region and Canada, where it most recently expanded, while adding clients such as Canada Goose and Adidas to its platform toward the end of last year. A higher take rate, or the portion of transactions kept as revenue, was also a positive surprise, given the assumption that higher volumes per client would usually come with discounts. Even as initial enthusiasm about the results moderated as the day went on, the stock continues to trade at almost triple the listing price just 8 months ago, on far higher multiples than most of its competition. Adyen is in the middle of taking eBay transactions from its US rival PayPal after their deal expires in 2020, with some limited volumes moving already. CEO Peter van der Does cited continued growth of enterprise merchants on its platform, as well as increased geographic reach that supports its point-of-sale business. A push to increase brick-and-mortar presence with self-service kiosks could serve to boost earnings. Despite the lofty valuation multiples regularly highlighted by skeptics, bulls will take confidence in the high growth numbers posted today, even if at current levels they are largely baked into the share price. Kasper Vita, Bloomberg News, London.
Well, Square gave a profit forecast for the current quarter Wednesday that missed analyst estimates. This as the payments company spends more on newer services, including its fast-growing peer-to-peer cash transfer app. The company, meantime, beat earnings estimates for the fourth quarter, with adjusted revenue rising 64% year over year. Joining us to discuss our Bloomberg Intelligence analyst, David Ritter. So, David, shares dropped as these earnings crossed. What's behind that?
Yeah, well, I think expectations are always high coming into the quarter for Square, given their recent track record of growth. I mean, there was a slight deceleration in revenue growth, whereas you'd seen acceleration throughout 2018. When they reported earnings last quarter, they guided for better than 40% revenue growth this year, and they came in a little bit higher than that, not tremendously higher than that. So I think that's a source of a little bit of disappointment, but I would say when I say deceleration, we're still talking about a company growing at over a 50% rate over last year, so pretty tremendous growth.
Indeed. That said, how is Square performing compared to its competition?
Yeah, I mean, they're doing tremendously well. You know, it was interesting. I had a chance to attend JP Morgan's Analyst Day yesterday, and Jamie Dimon specifically called out Square as a company that really beat them to that market. You know, JP Morgan Chase is a big processor for merchants, but they missed that. And he had it right on the head where he said the reason they've been winners isn't because of the original device to plug into an iPhone, but the fact that they started there, but they've since evolved into a full merchant services company. They're lending to merchants, they're providing payroll services, help with scheduling. If you're a restaurant, you can have help with your menus. So they've been very effective in layering on various services, but the reality is they're still very early on in selling those add-on services to the existing merchants, and they're capturing larger and larger new merchants as well.
David Ritter for us there of Bloomberg Intelligence. Thanks, David, for that update. Coming up, the world watching the summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. We will go live to Hanoi. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un struck an optimistic note at the start of their second summit in 8 months, as the U.S. seeks to advance nuclear talks that have largely stalled since the first meeting. Bloomberg's Ji-Hae Lee joins us from Hanoi. So, Ji-Hae, what are some most significant developments of the day that we need to know about?
Well, the significant developments that a lot of analysts and experts are looking forward to, rather, are some of the specifics to be drilled down in comparison to what Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un agreed on back in June 2018 in Singapore. A lot of people are saying that the joint statement back in Singapore was quite ambiguous, and they need more details. They need more credible commitments coming from Kim Jong-un and more credible statements coming from Donald Trump saying what he would be willing to do and what Kim Jong-un would be willing to do to reciprocate for those measures.
So what should we expect from day two?
Well, day two is the big day. Day two is in the afternoon, according to the White House schedule. Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un are expected to sign a joint statement. But this very joint statement was put together by U.S. nuclear envoy Stephen Biegun and North Korea's nuclear envoy Kim Hyok-chol. And Kim Hyok-chol, knowing what we know so far, is a nuclear disarmament expert. So we might think that could be an indication that rather than denuclearization, nuclear disarmament might be the wording included in the joint statement. We'll have to wait and see what exactly the details drilled down would be inked by the two leaders of North Korea and the U.S.
How might any outcome from these talks impact diplomatic and economic relations between the United States and China, given that China is a big diplomatic player in what is happening here?
Well, that's a good question, Emily. It's definitely an overarching theme when it comes to U.S. relations with North Korea. There's always Kim Jong-un symbolically visiting Xi Jinping. Also, Kim Jong-un's train going through China on his way to Hanoi. So Kim Jong-un, in a way, is playing this power move where he can't necessarily do anything without the approval and without the blessing of Xi Jinping. And having said that, U.S. could be using North Korea as a card to negotiate with China in terms of the trade war and the trade talks as well.
All right, Jihye Lee for us live in Beijing. Jihye, thank you so much for that update. Of course, BTV will have a full day of coverage of these meetings between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. Throughout the day, we're going to be talking to veterans of foreign policy around this landmark summit. Former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, former U.S. ambassadors to South Korea, Kathleen Stevens and Christopher Hill, and former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. All live starting 6 p.m. Eastern right here on Bloomberg Television. Well, as we discussed earlier, President Trump's top trade negotiator is dialing back expectations for a sweeping trade deal with China. But Alibaba co-founder and executive vice chair Joe Tsai is optimistic that a deal will happen. We caught up with Tsai in an exclusive interview from the Stanford GSB Sports Innovation Conference. Take a listen.
There are a lot of issues in this trade deal, but I think the important thing is that the tariff is going to stop. I think that'll help a lot of businesses on both sides of the ocean. The Chinese manufacturers will get a reprieve. That'll help them to continue to export. So it's going to be good for the businesses that are operating on Alibaba's platform.
What if that doesn't happen?
I think the dialogue between the United States and China is going to be a continuous dialogue. Trade is not the only issue. There are issues on intellectual property. There are issues on industrial policy. So I expect that that'll be a continuous conversation. Of course, the tariff itself is really a sort of an enforcement mechanism. But if you look at Alibaba's business, our business is driven by domestic consumption and also corporate digitization. So even though we have some parts of our business that are tied to exports, but most of the business within Alibaba is driven by domestic consumption, with now 300 million consumers, middle-class consumers that are buying things. They're going to demand more products. I think over time, even if there is no trade deal now, over time, the trade deficit between China and the United States will structurally correct itself as China will import more because we have an economy that is domestic consumption has become a bigger part of the economy. So the Chinese government is talking about over the next 15 years importing $30 trillion of goods and also $10 trillion of services. I think that's a very important thing as American service companies in healthcare, in banking can move to China and set up a foothold and serve the Chinese population.
So what does it all mean for Alibaba whether or not a deal happens?
We operate for the long term, so we're hopeful that a deal will happen. Obviously, the markets have responded to that, but if you look at our core businesses, most of it is tied to domestic consumption, as I said. So even if it doesn't happen, we're going to continue to chug along and focus on our strategy. Our strategy in new retail, for example, is focused on digitizing the domestic retail sector, making retail more efficient, and that is all driven by domestic consumption.
How optimistic are you, based on what you've seen, that a deal will be reached?
I've said before, I'm always half glass full kind of guy. So we are cautiously optimistic based on the developments. Obviously, the two delegations from the countries have met several times, and President Trump has said that there's going to be a meeting between him and President Xi at a place and time to be determined, I believe. So I think these are positive developments, and the signaling is pretty good right now.
We are here at the Sports Innovation Summit at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and you are the owner or co-owner of 3 sports teams, the Brooklyn Nets, New York Liberty, San Diego Seals. What attracted you to make these investments?
First of all, I love sports. I played sports through high school, college, and I just think it's the values of what you learn on the field can carry you very far in life. So I encourage all kids, including my own kids, to play sports.
But it's also a business opportunity for
absolutely,
you.
it's a business opportunity.
How much revenue are these teams driving?
If you look at an NBA team, it's actually a very good proposition from a business standpoint. I think the NBA is not just a league, it's a very substantial media and entertainment company. It's a very well-managed company, and the structure of the NBA is set up so that there's very good balance of between the owners and the players, and also among the owners. I was attracted to the NBA because of the international growth opportunities. When you look at markets like China with 300 million fans, the potential increase in the media rights in those markets, not just China, but also India. You're looking at Mexico, Indonesia, Philippines. So those opportunities are going to be tremendous in the future.
The NBA just announced a branded league in Africa. Why not Asia? We know in China there are a lot of basketball fans.
I don't know. You're going to have to ask Adam Silver about the geographic location, but I think the Africa League is going to help the NBA to develop players in Africa. Obviously, they've decided that there is also going to be a local fan base in Africa. There's a lot of sort of developmental aspect to that league. I think it's very exciting. I think having leagues in other parts of the world is a little bit more challenging because in Europe and also in Asia, they already have local leagues that's already been formed, playing games and all that. So I think that's one of the reasons why NBA picked Africa.
There's a mixed record for sports diplomacy dating back to the 1970s and the ping pong games, ending up with President Nixon visiting Beijing. Do you think sports could help improve tensions between the U.S. and China?
I think absolutely, because when you see athletes competing on the field and then when they get off the field or the court, they become friends, these are real authentic stories between people. And I think that people-to-people exchange, this real sort of true friendship that's genuine, authentic, is going to help the two countries understand each other better.
Some of my conversation there with Alibaba co-founder and executive vice chairman Joe Tsai. Coming up, we'll continue our discussion with Tsai from Stanford, California, covering the company's push into Hollywood, how its film business scored big with Oscar winner Green Book. This is Bloomberg. Best Buy is an exception in what has been a largely gloomy retail earnings season. The biggest electronics retailer in the U.S. posted holiday sales that were better than expected. Its profit outlook for the year also beat estimates. Sales were driven by appliances, video games, smartwatches, and smart home devices. We return now to our exclusive conversation with Alibaba executive chair and co-founder Joe Tsai. It's not just Netflix, but Alibaba that made Oscar history by taking home an Academy Award. Alibaba co-produced Green Book, which won the statue for Best Picture, becoming the first Chinese internet company ever to do such a thing. Now the company is eyeing more Hollywood movies as it expects more goods and services, including entertainment, to be imported into China. Here's more of my chat with Alibaba's Joe Tsai.
You have to look at this particular case as what it represents in terms of what we want to do in investing in movies. We want to invest in quality production, and the process of us committing to this project and greenlighting this project internally is a very interesting thing. One of our team members saw the movie, and she really pushed this internally. And so the committee that decided to commit our capital to help to make the movie, was convinced that this was going to be a quality production. We got involved because we see the opportunity to bring high quality content into China. So we went through a process of getting this project screened through the quota system. And so the movie is now going to premiere in China on March 1st. The tickets are going to be sold on our internet platform, Taopiaopiao, and we expect a very, very good result.
Do you know if any of the trade talks involve getting better access to the Chinese market for U.S. studios, getting better ticket revenue, for example?
I'm not aware of whether that's a specific conversation within the trade negotiations, but I think overall trend is that China is going to be more open for imports, not just in goods, but also services, including content. We're hopeful that over time that'll happen. As I said, $10 trillion of services over the next 10 years, service imports into China. That's going to be very exciting.
And are Chinese officials encouraging Alibaba, encouraging Chinese companies to invest in U.S. entertainment?
Currently, all the decision-making we make on investing in overseas, whether it's imports or content or things like that, is driven by our company management. We just may think that in this particular case, in the case of the Green Book, it makes a lot of sense for us to make that investment.
6 months until Jack Ma steps down as chair. How is the transition going, and how does the company change once that happens?
Well, the whole thing about a transition is that the company doesn't change. And Jack has done a very smart thing by announcing it 1 year ahead of time to give people ample time to sort of adjust to the new system. And the great thing is we have a great CEO in place, Daniel Zhang. He's been the CEO of the company for over 3 years. He's going to take over as executive chairman of the company. And he's been with the company for, I think, 12 years now. And someone who is sort of homegrown, developed within our system. We're very, very proud that we've been able to take our younger executives and develop them into leaders.
Alibaba has bought a few foreign e-commerce platforms, Duraz, Lazada. What's next for Alibaba in e-commerce and more broadly?
Well, from an e-commerce standpoint, I think if we're accessing local market consumers, we like Southeast Asia and South Asia. And these are the markets that we want to focus on. So the platform of Lazada, with operating in 6 countries, will be the focus over kind of the near to medium term. We're going to have to wait and see what we do, because it's very, very it's a very big undertaking to do something to serve consumers outside of China for any company. So I think for us, we're going to take it one step at a time.
Alibaba co-founder and executive vice chair, Joe Tsai. Well, IBM has apologized for using racially insensitive labels in an online job application. Applicants were forced to choose among ethnic categories, including yellow and mulatto. IBM says the website mistakenly used classifications still asked for in Brazil and South Africa. If you can believe, those are still used somewhere in the world. Still ahead, former SoFi CEO and founder Mike Cagney is back with a new venture after allegations of sexual harassment, and he is not the only man of the Me Too movement back at work. We will discuss next. This is Bloomberg. 21st Century Fox was ordered to pay $179 million to actors and producers of the TV drama Bones, who claimed they were cheated out of its profits. Actors Emily Deschanel and David Boreanaz, along with two producers, claimed Fox artificially deflated the profitability of the show by licensing it to Fox's broadcast network and streaming services. The award includes $129 million in punitive damages to deter the company from future conduct. Fox filed a request to either correct or vacate the award. Well, in 2017, SoFi founder Mike Cagney was ousted from the company amid allegations of sexual harassment. Now, he's back with a new startup and new funding. Cagney's blockchain-based lending startup Figure announced a $65 million funding round Wednesday, led by RPM Ventures and partners at DST Global. Figure provides home equity loans online in as little as 5 days, a process that's typically more time-intensive. But is it too soon for Cagney and the men of Me Too to return to the scene? Joining us to discuss, Bloomberg's Selena Wang. So, Selena, the real story here is that Cagney is getting a second chance and got a second chance pretty quickly. What does he have to say about the allegations against him?
Right. Cagney is just one of dozens of executives in Silicon Valley that had to step down from their positions as a result of allegations of mistreatment at their company. Now, I really pressed Mike Cagney on what have you learned from your previous experience? I did a lot of reporting over the past couple years about those allegations, and what he said is that he's very remorseful about what happened at SoFi, and the problem is that they let it grow too fast without determining what the culture was at the outset. Now there was allegations of sexual misconduct, mistreatment of women, nepotism in hiring, as well as basically not promoting women as fast as they should. And he said that at his new company, Figure, they spent a lot of time figuring out what the culture should be at the beginning. And I looked at an internal document. They have 55% of the company's executive team are women, 40% of the employees are women and minorities. 4 of the 5 co-founders are women. So he's clearly taken steps to improve the numbers. However, the company only has about 100 people. So the question is whether he can maintain that culture of cohesivity as the company grows.
Right. Clearly, it's great to hire more women, though that is not a defense for any former kind of behavior. This is a guy who was accused of creating a frat house culture that was especially toxic for women. There was a board investigation into a relationship he had with an employee. He lied to the board about it, allegedly, on top of a previous similar relationship.
But he has now said that he's admitting that he did have consensual sexual relationships with female employees.
And he says that won't happen again?
He's saying that won't happen again. It is interesting, though, if you look at the advisors and the board member, he has some very high-profile advisors, including Arthur Levitt, the former chairman of the SEC, also Blythe Masters, who's a very high-profile figure in the blockchain space.
So what are these investors and advisors telling you about why they're backing him?
So Mike Cagney proved himself at SoFi. He built it into the behemoth that it is.
He built a business, but he got ousted from that business.
The question here really is investors are taking a bet on the ethics and whether the morals at the new company, that risk weighing it against the ability of this company, which was valued at $365 million this past round, more than double the last round, whether it can become the behemoth that SoFi has become and become a unicorn in this space. And so far, the numbers have been pretty positive, so investors are really giving him the benefit of the doubt that he can rebuild the business he did at SoFi, and it's already expanding beyond home equity lines of credit. It's hoping to go into checking accounts, wealth management, unsecured loans, mortgage loans. So it's really following a similar playbook as SoFi, so investors are betting he can recreate that success without the culture problems.
It's a big bet. What does the competitive landscape look like?
So obviously there are the traditional banks that offer this, but it's very time consuming. It's very paperwork intensive. It typically takes 45 days. But some of the big banks do recognize how slow it is. So they are partnering with startups. For instance, US Bank and Wells Fargo are working with Blend to provide this online through their apps. There's also other digital upstarts like Point Digital Finance. So none of them are quite as fast as Figure is, but obviously they're expecting a lot of competition in the market.
And how has SoFi been doing since he left? I mean, they've got Anthony Noto in now as CEO. There was a lot of work to do to sort of get culture on track.
Right, absolutely. I mean, from what I've heard from my sources, there really has been a huge culture overhaul at the company. That really took a lot of time. That firm is really working on and having some trouble expanding really beyond that core business of student loan refinancing. They want to reach every touch point of a millennial's financial life. So that means insurance, that means wealth management. They have a cash management account. And the numbers haven't really proven yet whether or not they've successfully been able to penetrate all of those other markets, but they're actively working on it.
All right, Selena Wang, thank you so much for that report. Appreciate you stopping by. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Reminder, we're live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology and follow our global breaking news network, TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg.